Thank you. What was your favorite scene of the film?
I think the start, the ending, and maybe the result was what I liked.
Hey everybody, welcome back to another King James episode of Fundy Fridays. I am so happy to see you all again after, I think, about 2 months off camera. I know Jen's been doing all kinds of big episodes and crazy stuff, so I've just been leaning back and being a behind-the-scenes player for a little while. But I'm so excited to be back, man, it is crazy. I even went out and got myself a complicated shirt from Dan Flash's to mark the occasion.
It costs more because of the patterns. Yeah, and rightfully so.
Don't worry though, mine only cost $2 at a garage sale. I'm just super pumped to be back in front of you all with another wild story today. But if you're new around these parts, on this channel, my wife, the Reverend Jen, and I talk about things like American evangelical Christianity, conservative politics, pop culture, gay stuff, and I think for the first time ever now, summer popcorn flicks. By now, if you've clicked on this video, I bet you've been hearing the phrase sound of freedom bouncing around in between your eardrums for at least a month or so now. This movie has been in the news for, well, it seems like just about everything, and honestly, in all of my reading, the only consistent thing was that I never seemed to read the same story about it twice. Depending on where your information is coming from, you may hear Sound of Freedom referred to as an indie movie, a major studio debut, a smash hit, or a secret flop. Some folks will call it a heroic tale of child trafficking prevention and rescue. Others say that it's a dangerous bit of advertising that will divert important resources away from effective anti-trafficking organizations with misleading propaganda. It's also currently at the center of not one, but two conspiracy theories right now. And it may just be the harbinger of a new Christian media empire breaking into the American mainstream. And having spent the last 2 weeks of my life just really deeply honed in on this movie and the studio behind it, I can pretty comfortably say that it meets the criteria for all of those adjectives, albeit some more than others. And before we dive into everything, I do want you all to know that I have seen Sound of Freedom, and in my own hometown theater, no less. Given the gravity of the subject matter of this film, namely the trafficking of young children for purposes of abuse, I wanted to make sure I gathered as much information about the film as I possibly could before I made any judgments about it. And now here on the other side of this experience, I'm left with a lot to say and a strange feeling in my gut that we may be watching the beginning of something both huge and terrible. But I'll talk about my theater experience in a bit. Before we get there, I think it's really important for us to discuss not just Sound of Freedom, but Angel Studios, the streaming and production company behind the movie. In my opinion, theirs is a fascinating tale of innovative corporate strategy and also theopolitical audacity that just not nearly enough people are talking about right now. What started for me as just kind of a passing interest in a buzzy summer movie turned into a full-fledged obsession and a deep dive down the rabbit hole of this upstart new Christian streaming brand that seems kind of poised for world domination. Okay, I know that last part probably made me sound crazy. This is why you have to be careful with your online obsessions, y'all. I always worry about all them people that track us online looking at my data and thinking I'm some kind of lunatic. And speaking of protecting your personal data and maybe some embarrassing habits while you're on the internet, that reminds me, I'd like to take a second and thank the sponsor for today's episode, Surfshark VPN, and let you all know that you can go to surfshark.deals/fundyfridays right now and save 83% off of a 2-year plan plus 3 extra months free. That works out to about $2.21 a month for top quality online privacy protection. You can't beat it. Now, if you're anything like me, you spend an awful lot of time tripping and falling down rabbit holes about upstart Christian streaming services and the summer blockbusters that they make. You see 1 or 2 ads for Angel Studios, and the next thing you know, you've Googled variations of the phrase Sound of Freedom about 3,000 times. I know it happens to all of us, right? And I know what you're all thinking. Man, I hope nobody's tracking my online data. I would be really embarrassed if anybody saw me doing this, right? Well, that is precisely why all of you need Surfshark VPN. Surfshark offers you online privacy protection to make sure that no one knows you read Krusty Dave's Film Blog's review of The Chosen. Their IP and DNS leak protection ensures that no one can tell where you're connecting from or track your online data, so you can just pretend instead that you spent the evening watching Netflix like a normal person. And speaking of non-Angel Studios streaming services, did you know that Surfshark VPN can also help you access the 15 largest streaming libraries that Netflix offers, including the ones in the US and Japan? Truthfully, though, that shouldn't be surprising, since Surfshark is also the first ever VPN service to have servers in over 100 countries. Surfshark even maintains a strict no-logs data policy, utilizing a 100% RAM-only server operated out of the British Virgin Islands, and their laws encourage companies to abstain from logging their user data. Surfshark really is just designed with the customer in mind. It's jam-packed with features, it's super easy to use with just one-click operation, and you can even cover your entire household of internet-connected devices on just one account. So if all of you rabbit hole prone folks like me are ready to start taking your online privacy seriously, I would encourage you to check out surfshark.deal/fundyfridays right now, where you can once again save 83% plus 3 extra months free off of a 2-year subscription. But now it's time for us to fall down a rabbit hole of our own, so let's get back to the video. Alright, so like I said, before we jump into Sound of Freedom itself, I think it's really important that we talk about Angel Studios itself. And in order for us to do that, we're going to have to go all the way back to 2009 with this guy right here, Jeffrey Harman. In 2009, Jeffrey would have his first run-in with destiny while a graduate student in marketing at Brigham Young University. Jeffrey is a lifelong devout Mormon, born as one of 9 siblings to a conservative LDS family from rural Idaho, where he lived and sold potatoes to raise money for college before eventually heading off to the greener pastures of BYU in Provo, Utah. And it's here at BYU where Jeffrey would meet a befuddled Robert Wagstaff, or Dr. Bob as he seemed to liken himself, and his tongue scraper stick, the Aura Brush. This clip from Business on Main.
You take the spoon and you stick it at the back of your tongue and gently scrape. Let it dry and take a whiff. If it stinks, your breath stinks. And if your breath stinks, this is the only kind of spooning you're going to be getting.
The success of this early viral marketing campaign led Jeffrey, along with his brothers Jordan, Neil, Daniel, Theron, and family friend Benton Crane, to found the Harman Brothers marketing agency in 2013. And it wasn't long after the agency was founded that these guys got their first big break, a contract to market some toilet spray. And boy ever did these guys market the hell out of some toilet spray.
How do you make the world believe your poop doesn't stink? Or in fact that you never poop at all? Poopery. Poopery is the before-you-go toilet spray that is proven to trap those embarrassing odors at the source and save relationships.
See, I bet a lot of you recognize that ad. It was incredibly popular about a decade ago. And at the time, it established the Harman Brothers and their agency as a fast-rising star in the newly emerging world of internet viral marketing. The agency would go on to have further success with campaigns for products like the Squatty Potty, Purple mattresses, and Lume deodorant, which both utilized and expanded upon this first viral success. Clearly not ones to slow down or rest on their laurels, though, the Harman Brothers would start moving on to their next big project as soon as 2014. This time, it would be the VidAngel censorship service, which would be headed up by 2 of the brothers, Jeffrey and Neil. VidAngel sought to sell conservative parents and other cautious moviegoers sanitized versions of the day's hottest movies and TV shows, and to allow a broad degree of customizability in regards to what was being censored, be it language, sexuality, violence. You could kind of pick whatever you wanted. And it even got its own kitschy long-form YouTube ad, just like all the other products they sold.
Yes, VidAngel is an actual real product. And yes, you can really watch filtered movies for $1. Heavenly mic drop.
Ow!
Now, as one might expect, VidAngel ran into copyright problems with this business model nearly immediately, since a lot of major studios just weren't interested in selling distribution rights of their films to this upstart Mormon censorship service. VidAngel ended up utilizing a really complex system to kind of try and get around this, buying DVDs and Blu-rays at retail prices and then manually decrypting them to get around the copy protection so they could, like, make their censorship edits. And then they would stream a copy of that edited version of the movie straight to the user. It's honestly not really important to know exactly how VidAngel's system worked. What is important to know is that it got them sued, and not like regular sued, like mega ultra sued, by a fantastic four of angry movie studios, including Warner Brothers, 20th Century Fox, Lucasfilm, and the big D of global entertainment itself, the Disney Corporation. Yeah, if you're ever on the wrong end of a lawsuit and that's the name you see on the other end of the sheet, you know things are bad. Screw around with the mouse, he's gonna own your house. It's not like the Harmons were unprepared for this, though. The brothers had anticipated that Hollywood studios might not be too happy with their business model, and had a three-pronged counter-argument just ready to go. Probably most importantly, they felt that VidAngel's use of these media materials fell under fair use, citing that they thought their work was transformative. It was actually VidAngel's claim of fair use that the companies went after in court, wherein they stated that simply censoring portions of a movie did not constitute a transformative use of said media. VidAngel would end up losing this initial lawsuit in December of 2016 when the courts agreed with the plaintiffs. And then they would lose again in August of 2017 when the ruling was upheld by the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals. In response, VidAngel filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy. This allowed them to continue operation while they restructured their business around a new and hopefully legal streaming-based model instead of the disc-based one, and also protected them from the expected incoming fines and restitution coming out of the lawsuit. After an additional 3 more years of negotiation, VidAngel received a primary fine of $62 million, which was eventually negotiated down to about $10 million. As one might expect, though, even negotiating down like that, it's pretty hard to keep a company operating while being sued by Disney through most of that company's operating time. And during this period from 2016 to 2019, the Harmons had to get pretty creative in order to keep VidAngel afloat. One avenue that the brothers would pursue would be to take advantage of a process called equity crowdfunding. Now, both my bank and student loan servicer will assure you that I am not a financial guru. So instead, let's check in with Michelle Black and Jordan Tarver at the Wall Street Journal to find out a little more about equity crowdfunding. What is equity crowdfunding? Equity crowdfunding is a unique way to raise capital for your business without taking on new debt. It's a form of fundraising that attempts to attract investors who are willing to contribute funds towards your business goals in return for a financial stake in the company. In general, equity crowdfunding is a business funding model that involves collecting smaller sums of money from a larger number of private investors. Would-be investors may be able to get involved for as little as $100. This approach differs from trying to attract sizable investments from venture capital firms or angel investors, a business capital strategy that's out of reach for many startups and established small businesses alike. So with my limited understanding of it, I would say that equity crowdfunding kind of sounds like the midpoint between what most of us think of as crowdfunding, that's called reward crowdfunding, where like you give to a Kickstarter for like a board game or some kind of item, and then when they successfully fund it, you get a copy of that item in return. It's like a midpoint between that and then just buying traditional stock on the stock market like everybody knows. So following the initial December 2016 ruling against them, the Harmons began to allow people to invest directly in VidAngel via a crowdfunding initiative, asking for about $5 million associated with the lawsuit and general upkeep of the company. And in a rousing success, they brought in $10 million, more than double what they were asking for, in the first 5 days. Apparently energized by this achievement, the Harmons decided to take a much bolder approach moving into 2017 and start equity crowdfunding original content. Now, I can't be sure of the exact timeline of how things went down with this, but from everything I reviewed, it seems like in 2017, the Harman Brothers were introduced to Dallas Jenkins, an evangelical filmmaker and actually actually the son of one of the guys who wrote Left Behind, by mutual collaborator and fellow Mormon Darrell Eves. Jenkins and Eves pitched the Harmons a radical new TV show concept, a realistic portrayal of the life of Jesus Christ, but told in the bingeable and engaging style of a high production value Netflix or Hulu show, and streamed directly and exclusively to VidAngel.
I look at projects that were in the past with religious projects, and it was like super stoic, and they have to get everything just exactly right in the Bible. What I love about the scripts, love the problems that humanity brings to each other, and I love how they're able to face it, and as they look to Christ, and Christ there to teach them, or by example, that's when they're able to really better themselves and be a better person. And
we want the viewer to see that the people who met Christ had the same issues that you do, and the same struggles, and the same needs, and the same hunger. And the solution for them is the same solution for you. And if we can get them to connect in that way, if you can see Jesus through the eyes of those who actually met him, we say you can be changed and impacted in the same way they were.
Neil and Jeff would pounce on this Christian-flavored opportunity to develop a new revenue stream for VidAngel. And as such, they threw all of their crowdfunding expertise behind this new project, now dubbed The Chosen. After producing a pilot episode and airing it directly to VidAngel, this new team opened up equity crowdfunding opportunities for the project to the public, even founding a new company, The Chosen LLC, in order to independently distribute future profits to investors. And once again, the Harmons would find massive success with this crowdfunding model, which by early 2019 had raised a reported $13 million, beating out at the time the most successful crowdfunded media project ever, the Mystery Science Theater 3000 reboot. To date, the show has raised around $40 million total dollars, it seems like, and is in production on its 4th season. Honestly, this show is almost weird enough to be its own episode of Fundy Fridays, but just quite not enough, I guess. They've already gotten in trouble with the evangelicals for somehow being both too Mormon and too gay, and recently The Chosen even got embroiled in the SAG strike when Jenkins took to Instagram to complain that his strike exemption hadn't been granted, despite the tens of millions in funding and the backing he received from both Lionsgate and the CW. Oh, and there's also this little uncomfortable moment with Dallas and his wife Amanda from a June 2023 funding live stream for The Chosen that's so offensive I find it hard to believe it's real.
First things first, let's do something a little bit light and fun before we get into a few bigger things. Look what we're wearing. What does this say? My rabbi walks on water. I know that we're not Jewish, but Jesus was, and was a rabbi. Oh, in case you were wondering if they went rogue there or whatever, please note that this is official merch for The Chosen that you could totally go buy right now if you wanted to. You shouldn't buy it because it's incredibly anti-Semitic, but you could buy it, and even that is messed up on its own. Whew, that was depressing. It's a very offensive shirt. I don't know. I kind of feel like the wind's been taken out of my sails. I need something to lift my spirits and kind of get this episode back on the right track. Little stand-up comedy, maybe?
Do we have anybody here tonight under the age of 30? Any 20-somethings? That's still the dumbest group of humans I've ever met in my life.
Well, my spirits certainly aren't lifted, but I guess the plot's back on track now, so that's something. But seriously, after seeing all of the initial crowdfunding success they had with The Chosen in early 2017, the Harmons wasted no time in running it back and taking another shot at this brand new cash cow of theirs. Later that same year, they would launch a new and successful crowdfunding campaign for their newest show, Dry Bar Comedy. This series features clean comedy shows at an alcohol-free comedy club in Provo, Utah, owned and operated by the Harmons specifically for the production of this show. I can't even imagine what demographic they might be targeting with this one. But really, it seems like that with Dry Bar, the Harmons were trying to kind of go the exact opposite direction they went with The Chosen. Instead of a high-budget drama meant to challenge shows like Game of Thrones or Stranger Things, this new show was cheap to produce and provided a bevy of quick, funny sound bites that were just perfect for sharing and discussing on Facebook and later TikTok. I'm not going to pretend to have watched every one of their reported 300 plus comedy specials, or to say that the comedians they hire aren't talented, and I won't even say that comedy has to be crass in order to be funny. But I will say that even in my brief viewings of the Dry Bar product, I was able to notice a rather consistent theme across a lot of the specials and jokes. You remember that Brad Upton joke I played earlier about millennials? Well, see if you can find any similarities between that and this bit by Dry Bar comedian Karen Morgan.
Everybody's mad at the millennials. And I think it's because they invented avocado toast.
Oh, sorry, are you getting tired of watching Gen X and boomers make fun of millennials? Well then, can I interest you in some millennials making fun of themselves for being millennials then?
The only time I felt bad asking my parents for money is if they're already asleep. Wake up, Mom and Dad. I ordered pizza for you guys. Michael, it's 11:30. Okay, I'll eat it.
Taste aside, after this show's success, the Harman Brothers were able to walk into 2020 with 3 successful crowdfunding initiatives under their belt, 2 of which left them with 2 totally funded television shows and specials just waiting to be released. And where it seems like chopping all the naughty stuff out of Disney movies for a living is a legal minefield of dubious profitability, the Harmans had clearly shown the ability to generate the same kind of revenue and interest through the much less complicated and difficult world of original content creation. It was clearly time for a change of direction. And so moving into 2021, at the end of the lawsuit, the original VidAngel was split into 2 separate companies. The first of these, VidAngel Entertainment, kept the censorship and streaming platform they had, and was sold off by the Harman Brothers to this shady group of benefactors you'll see here.
You saw Bush and Gore debating in Boston earlier this week. I wish they'd
Okay, you know I just did that as a goof, but I'm looking at the right to censor now, and I had never noticed before just how Mormon-inspired this getup is. But anyway, I digress. Now, you may be surprised to know that VidAngel actually still exists and operates in its restructured form to this very day. That's not the company we're here to talk about today. Instead, it was the other company that emerged out of this split, Angel Studios, which would form the foundation of the story we're telling today. And instead of censorship, Angel Studios would move into 2021 exclusively focused on original content creation. They would start the year by taking over both The Chosen and Dry Bar Comedy from VidAngel, and would then take the bold step of acquiring the Angel.com domain name for a whopping $2 million. And from there, Angel would set up a new crowdfunding platform through this new domain, as you can see here. And given what we all know by now, you should know pretty damn well that they definitely made a kitschy long-form YouTube ad for it. And from here, the company would absolutely roar into 2022, taking a step away from crowdfunding and instead pivoting into the hyper-wealthy world of venture capital investment. 2 massive and very tech-forward investment firms would lead a round of funding for Angel Studios that would see them take in an additional $47 million in new investments in January of 2022. The first of these firms, Uncorrelated Ventures, it kind of just makes sense. Led by former Bain Capital partner Salil Deshpande, and backed with Bain Capital money, the firm specializes in new applications and technologies, not too awful different from Angel Studios itself. You may be familiar with some of the products they've invested in, like Dalupa, Round with a W, and Ort. Seriously, y'all, I am this close to giving them all my money so they can put my fart bucks into Booba. Good lord, what are these names? And for those who don't know, Bain Capital is the $100+ billion investment firm founded by none other than Mormon icon and current Utah Senator Mitt Romney. So I just can't help but feel like this one makes sense, the whole Mormon connection, you know? But the other investment firm at play here, GigaFund, is the one that's more interesting, I think. A review of their most recent investments shows that they prefer to put money into things like AI supercomputing, cutting-edge nuclear energy tech, and genetic testing. Oh, and basically anything Elon Musk does with investments in SpaceX, Boring Company, and Neuralink. Not too surprising, honestly, considering the fact that the head of GigaFund is an old buddy of Elon's from his PayPal days, Luke Nosek. But still, this big, world-changing, macro-level stuff, it feels pretty far away from a simple Christian streaming service. And so if you're like me, you're kind of left wondering exactly what this massive and very future-forward investment firm sees in this little Christian streaming brand. Well, bearing in mind that these venture capital firms tend to work into the billions of dollars, this may not have actually been a huge investment for either of the two firms at all. I can only imagine that investing in a streaming service is just a teensy bit cheaper than something like, say, a nuclear reactor, so maybe this was just a lower cost way for these companies to diversify their portfolios. But at the same time, Angel Studios does bring some really interesting ideas to the table when it comes to media streaming. One of these innovations is the pay-it-forward model of funding for Angel Studios, which allows those who use the app to directly financially invest in shows or specials or movies that they want to see made. Angel Studios dubs these kind of investors as angel investors. Now, as someone who has spent a fairly large amount of time recently on the Angel Studios app, let me tell you, this pay-it-forward strategy is aggressive as hell. Obviously, as part of my research, I wanted to watch a couple of Angel Studios shows, see what all the fuss was about, and it is admittedly free to use. And the thing that caught me most was that between every single episode of a series, like when you move between like episode 3 and episode 4 or whatever, they will tell you directly who paid for you to watch that episode. I had Bill pay for a couple of mine. I remember him at one point. Thank you for that, and sorry if I wasted your money on being a liberal watching this for ironic funsies. Truth be told, though, this is just a sappy rebrand of the old equity crowdfunding model that has already time and time again delivered fat stacks of cash to the Harmans. Investors in individual shows do even stand to profit off of the show's successes, just like they would with regular stocks. But the level of risk mitigation here for Angel Studios does seem to have some merit, since, presumably no one would invest in a show that they didn't intend to watch, right? So each small money investment should be expected to come stapled with a near guaranteed viewer for the show once it's made. And if you believe the Harmans at least, this intersection of public interest and direct funding should allow Angel Studios to have a rate of both project success and profitability far exceeding the major Hollywood studios and their decision-making boardrooms.
Hollywood has been controlling what we watch for the last 100 years. And who approves every cookie-cutter rom-com, superhero flick, and reality show? Only a handful of Hollywood executives. A handful's all you need. Handful's all you need. Hollywood produces over 1,500 movies and TV shows a year. That means for every one Baby Yoda, Hollywood makes 400 new Housewives of Atlanta. And that is not the way. Hollywood can't know what you want because they're not you. So, for the first time ever, there's a way to create high-quality TV and film without the Hollywood guesswork. And the best part? The content is chosen by the greatest executives of all time. You.
So yeah, this aggressive marketing surge both off of Angel Studios' website and on their streaming website is really just, it seems like, kind of an annoying mask hiding the true nature of the pay-it-forward model, to mitigate studio risk and increased profitability by passing the burden of funding individual movies and shows directly onto the consumer, thereby hopefully only putting out successful content that people have already told you they will enjoy before it reaches the screen. It's certainly a gamble, and I can't pretend to agree with or even fully understand the science behind it, but at face value, I think we can agree it kind of demonstrates some merit. It makes sense. Passes the eye test, as they say. And while I myself am a terrible heathen beast who got just so much sick satisfaction out of clicking that skip button over and over, I'm sure that this guilted out strategy has worked on some of Angel Studios' more devout and earnest viewers. So it may be weird and kind of gross, but it's still a good business practice, at least from their perspective. And speaking of their audience, therein lies what I think is the second interesting point about Angel Studios' plan. See, while Angel Studios works really hard to keep the door open for conservatives and evangelicals and every manner of fundamentalist and conservative Christian, they also seem to be trying to leave a little bit of the door cracked for folks who don't align with those views but may still somehow be interested in their programming. In my review of the content available on the Angel Studios app, which right now isn't too awful much, they're still an upstart, but their stuff seems to fall into 3 distinct categories of content. Overtly Christian projects. These are things like The Chosen and His Only Son. These are kind of self-explanatory, but notably they can appeal to a very broad range of Christians if made correctly. You know, you see The Chosen, it's being watched by a lot of different folks, so that's something to keep an eye on. The second category is programs written by Christians, and very specifically some Mormons, which are distinctly family-friendly, but not expressly religious or political. This would include shows like Freelancers, a non-religious sitcom created by a sketch troupe from BYU, and Wingfeather Saga, a fantasy novel cartoon adaptation written by a Christian author, but without direct references to Christianity itself. And the third category, politically charged offerings that appeal to modern fundamentalism-adjacent ideologies without being completely, or at least overtly, religious themselves. So this would be things that, you know, you're going to see more fundamentalist Christians and evangelicals and conservatives like. They're going to be conservative when I say politically charged, but they're not inherently religious. They're just kind of tangentially related to religion. And it is this last category where it seems Angel Studios has found their biggest success to date with Sound of Freedom. And yes, just for the record, the movie is called Sound of Freedom. There is no the. You're going to see it referenced a lot, like the hashtags a lot too, the Sound of Freedom. It is Sound of Freedom. There is no the. Sound of Freedom. And while they technically did first release His Only Son into theaters earlier this year, the first successful crowdfunding ever for a theatrical release, it was to very modest numbers overall, and clearly only a pilot test for the overall funding model. It sounds like everybody involved, though, realized pretty quickly that it was Sound of Freedom that was going to be Angel Studios' true mainstream debut. Alright, so now I think we've covered everything you need to know about Angel Studios up to this point, so it's probably a good time to get on to talking about the movie Sound of Freedom itself. Hey, Jim Caviezel, you're the star of this flick. Do you have any words about the movie, or just words of wisdom you want to lead us off with before we jump into this next section?
Abraham Lincoln credited Harriet Stowe when she wrote Uncle Tom's Cabin. This powerful story inspired millions to rise up and fight against slavery. I think we can make Sound of Freedom the Uncle Tom's Cabin of 21st century slavery.
Well, that's not what I expected you to say. Good Lord, Jim. Okay. Let's just go ahead and move on, everyone. He's not going to get any more normal or less problematic than that, honestly. Sound of Freedom primarily tells the story of Tim Ballard, who is a complicated figure, to say the least. A former Homeland Security agent who originally worked with the Internet Crimes Against Children Task Force, Tim famously left this job out of a desire to start rescuing children who were victims and survivors of trafficking instead of just catching perpetrators. He would go on to become a prominent anti-human trafficking advocate and activist, and he would also go on to found the prominent anti-trafficking organization, Operation Underground Railroad. And already we're off to a rough start, aren't we? I mean, I don't care how friggin' righteous your mission is. It is weird anytime a white dude tries to stand where Harriet Tubman stood. Like, dude, pick any other name. Like, Operation Rescue. Like, that took me 3 seconds. Is that so hard? But uncomfortable name aside, Tim reports that he and his OUR team have completed a variety of anti-trafficking sting operations all over the world, with a particular focus on the rescue and return of children trafficked for the purposes of sexual abuse. The group also reports that they make donations to anti-trafficking task forces and police units throughout the U.S., and that they also run an aftercare program for youth who have been rescued from trafficking situations. I mean, let's be honest, nobody ever wants to call out the guy whose job description is rescues kids for a living. But in reality, Tim and OUR are shrouded in several controversies that make this otherwise fantastic work they do seem tragically insincere in some regards. And what's more, concerns about OUR's effectiveness and capability as an anti-trafficking organization do seem to have some merit. Now, of course, the particular line of work this organization does would inevitably require a reasonable degree of secrecy. But OUR takes that concept to the extreme, providing the public with absolutely no details about their foreign expenses. They'll talk about the operations, but they won't talk about the expenses, and also providing very minimal information about their aftercare program. This, combined with at least one very public failure of that aftercare program following a sting operation in the Dominican Republic in 2014, it just leaves a lot of troubling questions about their operations and that aftercare program totally unanswered. This is from an article written by Meg Conley, a former OUR volunteer and participant in that 2014 raid. I was told 2 of the children had been trafficked for the first time that day. It didn't seem to occur to anyone that OUR may have created a demand. After the sting, I asked people on the jump team where the 26 kids were taken. I was only given vague answers. Aftercare wasn't really their focus, I was told, but they partnered with people who did it well. I found out what really happened from a foreign policy report. In 2014, after OUR's first operation in the Dominican Republic, a local organization called the National Council for Children and Adolescents quickly discovered it didn't have the capacity to handle the 26 girls rescued. They were released in less than a week. Some testified, the article reported. The local organization lost track of others. All those kids in 2014 got from us was a soda and a swim, and Ballard came out ahead in the deal. Furthermore, generally speaking, it seems like more prominent, established, and respected anti-trafficking organizations make a habit out of not working with OUR. The only official law enforcement partnership I could find that they had engaged with involved a $200,000 donation they made to the Washington State Patrol's Net Nanny Sting program, which is an amount that the patrol's PR team itself called inconsequential to their budget before cutting off their partnership with OUR entirely. Wow, $200,000 just to get roasted like that. Ouch!
She says she don't fuck with me. Who said that you can't hold?
But likewise, world-renowned anti-human trafficking authority and lawyer Ann Gallagher ripped both Tim and OUR apart in a 2015 HuffPo article, questioning his understanding of the complex legal difficulties associated with anti-trafficking work and calling his operations arrogant, unethical, and illegal. Hell, even his own former employer, that ICAC task force, they disavowed any and all working operations with OUR in 2016, telling their staff in a memo that none of them were allowed to partner with OUR in any capacity. So while OUR may and very likely has done some good in the world, and probably rescued a few folks as far as we know, their organizational secrecy combined with all of this public stuff that we do know, it paints a picture that's admittedly somewhat concerning. But then there are also many more concerns surrounding both Tim and OUR's intense focus on and strategy for marketing their mission to the donating public. We already spoke about the racist overtones that name of theirs can very easily convey. But even worse, Meg Conley from before also expressed in her article that the organization had denied multiple requests from black organizations to change that name, even as OUR continued to center black and Latino children in almost all of their advertising. Oh, and he also accepted a 2017 painting of himself and his wife carrying black children down a literal railroad while Harriet Tubman herself literally stands to the side and watches Tim and his family in reverence. You know, say what you want about his work, but it's the humility for me. And that right there is just the tip of a deeply exploitative iceberg. This from Thomas Stackpole at foreignpolicy.com. Simultaneously, OUR is making a public splash by amplifying the drama of its tactics and the ways people can support the group's cause without ever busting into a brothel. A documentary movie called The Abolitionists has been screened privately in select U.S. theaters, and a proposed TV series about OUR is currently being filmed. The organization's Give a Lincoln, Save a Slave campaign, God, I hate reading that, which, like the term Underground Railroad, conjures notions of 1800s anti-slavery efforts, asks people to become quote-unquote abolitionists by giving $5 a month. Supporters can sign up to receive text message alerts when children are saved, and if they're big funders, they can get front row seats. The tech executive watching their Acapulco operation gave more than $40,000. Okay, I'm going to stop for a second because I wrote this and I'm like reading it again. This is so, you cannot sell tickets to a freaking trafficking sting. You cannot sell tickets and film like these are people, they have rights, and like, yeah, the criminals are there, but so are the people who are being trafficked. Like, what's wrong with you? And see, Tim leans so hard into this dramatic, sensationalized action movie aesthetic that a lot of people have come to associate with anti-human trafficking work over the past few years. I suspect, while it doesn't draw the respect of actual experts like Ann Gallagher and ICAC, it probably does draw in a lot of donations from well-meaning but very misled folks who just want to help some children in really bad situations.
I fight because I know that millions of children are sitting somewhere in the world saying, I don't belong here. I fight because there are millions of pedophiles that exist in this world. I fight because I lead a team that knows how to fight and knows how to extract and liberate the most vulnerable children in this world.
And just to cap off the strange story of Tim Ballard for now, he also happens to be a lifelong devout Mormon. But in addition to being noble, just because, seriously, how many Mormons are going to be in this story, Tim's faith is a prominent feature of both his personal mythos and his stated anti-trafficking mission.
We were in one of the most dangerous regions in the world for trafficking. We were undercover pretending to be doctors doing a medical clinic. That was the only way we could get into this particular region to find the kids who were being trafficked. And on our way out, the traffickers who brought the kids to us to be medically cleared, they themselves were, served by this medical clinic. But then when they were done, they decided, why not just kill them and take their cars and take their money and take everything they have, because there's no repercussion for us. And so I did something that was not necessarily tactically sound, but I felt I should. I went into one of our cars, I closed the door, I pulled out my tattered copy, my missionary copy of the Book of Mormon, I just held it. And I thought of every miracle story of the Book of Mormon, every angel story, because that's what we needed. We needed an angel.
And lest we forget Tim's most famous slogan for OUR, the now almost ubiquitous, God's children are not for sale. I don't want to say that it implies ungodly children are totally for sale, but I personally feel like literally no human being is for sale might have been a bit more comprehensive for a t-shirt. But I mean, when your wife literally puts the immortal souls of you and your family on the line in order to give you a chance to move into anti-human trafficking work, you kind of know that faith is really driving the whole operation.
Kids, and really it was my wife. In the second week of December of 2013, she grabbed me by the collars and she said, I will not let you jeopardize my salvation, she said.
So this should give you kind of an idea of who Tim Ballard is and how this whole thing may have came together. Tim's combined lore as an anti-trafficking commando, devout in his faith, and crying out for the public to take up his cause. It kind of seems like a story that's destined for the silver screen in some regards. Controversies be damned. And obviously, Tim had Hollywood on his mind, at least in some capacity, considering the references we saw earlier to documentaries and TV. But oddly enough, Sound of Freedom may actually predate even those efforts. See, this movie is far older than I think most of you might expect. Writing for it began as early as 2015 per reports. And bear in mind, Tim only founded OUR in 2013, which, I don't know, I feel like that kind of just gives us an insight into how media-focused he was going to be from the very start. But if the movie is going to be made, you are definitely going to have to find someone to actually play a character as gargantuan in personality as Tim Ballard. I mean, short of Jesus Christ himself, but I doubt he's available, right? Wait, they really got him? Like Jesus? Oh, it's the guy that played Jesus in that movie in 2004? Okay, close enough. But for real, apparently it wasn't just Jim's turn as the savior of all mankind that got Tim interested in having him for the role.
Tim Ballard came to the meeting. He had seen 2 films that I did One was called The Count of Monte Cristo, and then the other one was The Passion of the Christ, and he felt that I'd be the right guy to play him.
Okay, I mean, the Jesus thing was kind of obvious, but you cannot look me in my eyes and tell me that you saw the Count of Monte Cristo coming into this story. But in all honesty, Jim Caviezel does kind of seem about as close as one could possibly get to Tim Ballard for this role. I think most of us can agree that his iconic, if not extremely polarizing, take on Jesus in The Passion at least gives us reason to think he could successfully take on a character as larger than life as Tim Ballard. What's more, though, is Jim brings his own unique and intense religious energy to this production as well. Also a fundamentalist Christian himself, albeit of the Catholic variety this time, Jim has never seemingly shied away from expressing his conservative fundamentalist views. Even as far back as 2006, we can see him getting really weird with his faith. Specifically at that time in regards to a proposed stem cell research bill in my own home state of Missouri. Let's take a look at this YouTube clip, which is now so old it could legally have a driver's license. Good Lord, the relentless march of time doesn't stop!
Californians agreed to spend $6 billion on the exact same science. Now they admit there won't be any cures for at least 15 years. Same science, $6 billion, no cures. Beware of loopholes. Missourians will pay. Don't be tricked.
You know now. Don't do it. Vote no on 2.
Now, for reference, what Jim is speaking there is Aramaic, the language he learned for and spoke throughout the Passion of the Christ. I can assure you, with every fiber of my being, that the average Missourian does not speak Aramaic, despite this being offered with absolutely no translation, which is sad because it turns out the whole thing is even stranger if you know what he's saying. This from the Washington Examiner. Bill Fulco, the Loyola Marymount professor who translated Mr. Gibson's script for Passion and coached the actors on the ancient language, told the Washington Times yesterday the phrase means, "You betray the Son of Man with a kiss," a reference to Judas's betraying Jesus and a phrase used in the Greek of Luke's Gospel. And like I said, he gets weird with it. But Jim manages to even nail one more part of the Tim Ballard persona, specifically the law enforcement angle. His most notable role since 2004 is likely his multi-year run as stoic CIA agent John Reese on the TV show Person of Interest. I mean, come on, the CIA and Homeland Security, they're basically 3 floors apart from each other. It's a total match. Okay, so now we have our inspiration, and we have our star. Now all you need is a writer, a producer, and a director, and you've got the beginnings of an actual movie coming together. Sound of Freedom's producer would come in the form of one Eduardo Verástegui, a prominent Mexican singer, actor, and right-wing abortion activist. And by right-wing, I mean he literally worked with Trump and organized a Mexican CPAC conference in 2022. He also renewed his Catholic faith in 2002, so I bet he got old Jimmy's stamp of approval pretty quick. Wait, is born-again Catholic even a thing? Also, fun fact, Eduardo has a cameo in Sound of Freedom as Paul, the rich benefactor behind one of Tim's sting operations. And rounding out the core group would be Alejandro Gomez Monteverde, who both wrote and directed the film. Alejandro seems to be the most normal of the 4 major players in my opinion. He's Catholic, but he's not too overtly religious that I could find. His wife, former Miss USA Allie Landry, will make occasional appearances on Catholic media, but otherwise they're not too controversial. But with their core group in place and a little bit of funding from both motivational speaker / sexual harasser Tony Robbins and, I shit you not, the founder of the Patron Tequila Company, these guys were able to get this movie completed by the summer of 2018. And they even managed to find an initial distributor that year in the form of 20th Century Fox. It seemed like everything was going according to plan, until the mouse came for them too. After Disney's 2019 buyout of 20th Century Fox, Sound of Freedom was shelved for reasons that have never been officially confirmed to this day. Obviously, the many controversies surrounding Tim and OUR may have played a part, and on the other side of the coin, you'll find plenty of people online who are willing to tell you that Disney was just trying to protect the global elites and their trafficking rings. But if we're being honest with the time frame and stuff, in reality, like most things then, it was probably just COVID that got the thing shelved. Either way, though, in an effort to release their film from the mouse's mighty clutches, producer Verostegui bought Disney out of the rights to Sound of Freedom before taking it to none other than the Harman Brothers and their upstart Angel Studios in 2022. Reportedly, Angel streamed the movie to about 100,000 potential early investors who absolutely loved the film and greenlit it for financing within just a matter of days. It seems like at that point, the crowd's wisdom had found Angel Studios their next major success. And like usual, the Harmons pounced on this opportunity by throwing the weight of their equity crowdfunding expertise behind the film. And once again, this process proved to be another great success for them, as Sound of Freedom was able to raise the $5 million it was looking for distribution in just about 2 weeks after the crowdfunding initiative was launched. And with that, the film was slated for a broad theatrical release on July 4th of 2023, presumably to capture as much freedom energy as they possibly could. And it's here where I think the story of Sound of Freedom gets really, really interesting. See, spoiler alert, but in my opinion, this film is likely to end up in bargain bins after its theatrical run, sandwiched between old copies of Terminator Genisys and that one DVD of Next Friday that every Walmart on Earth seems to have. But on the other side, I think that the marketing strategy for this film is going to be in textbooks for years to come very soon. So, just exactly how did the team push this movie to a broad audience? Well, for one, it seems like the team all kind of agreed very early on to lean into all the conservative and fundamentalist support they were getting, and particularly to embrace the absolutely voracious support the film was getting from the QAnon community. See, the image of child trafficking that Tim and OUR have been cultivating for years now as part of their own marketing and branding, well, it's also one that very conveniently lines up with the QAnon worldview. I mean, if all the world's elites out there are hosting weekly secret child sacrifice parties, well, they're going to need a pretty steady supply of children to sacrifice, aren't they? And the kind of organized trafficking rings that Tim and OUR focused on, well, they seemed like a natural fit to occupy that boogeyman of the QAnon worldview. Likewise, it seems like Tim and OUR were more than happy to go all in on the QAnon crowd as a means of maintaining sustainable donations and support over the long term. And in particular, Tim seemed really happy to position himself as the defiant hero. And in particular, Tim seemed more than happy to present himself as the defiant hero standing between all of these folks and the elite global predators of their nightmares. Now, this shift didn't happen all at once, as Tim would initially acknowledge that QAnon followers were misguided, even though in the same breath he would talk about how badly he wanted to capture their momentum and zeal. This from Kevin Roose at the New York Times. For established anti-trafficking groups, the surge of support from internet conspiracy theorists has been a mixed blessing. Some activists, such as Tim Ballard, the founder of the anti-trafficking group Operation Underground Railroad, see an opportunity to reach a new, hyper-engaged online audience. Some of these theories have allowed people to open their eyes, Mr. Ballard said, so now it's our job to flood the space with real information so the facts can be shared. Tim also worked hard to cultivate a relationship with Q's favorite president, Donald Trump. Tim both served on Trump's Public-Private Advisory Council to End Human Trafficking, and he also consistently acted as a supportive surrogate on behalf of Trump, hyping up the border wall as a means of preventing child trafficking.
Right now, the cartels are clearly choosing to take children around the ports of entry. We just heard the stats. Over 90% of the children are coming around. The cartels are choosing that route because it's better for them. Why are we giving them that chance? Don't give them that chance. Make them go to the port of entry and wall it off with technology, with barriers, whatever's required to force them to have their only choice can be the port of entry. That's the highest chance that we're going to rescue children. And rescuing children should be our #1 priority.
Oh, and please just know, I'm sure you do, but just in case you don't, Tim is absolutely wrong here, and most experts generally agree that a border wall would have an almost negligible impact on human trafficking prevention. And over time, instead of leaning away from these conspiracies as one would probably hope he would do, Tim's tone has instead shifted much more dramatically at this point into just straight up QAnon talk. For reference, that segment I read before where he was talking about needing to give the QAnon folks the real truth, well, that's from 2020. But take a look at this clip from an interview that both Tim and Jim Caviezel did with Jordan Peterson, and notice how blatant the change in his tone is from then to now.
I mean, I'm going to post today another operation in West Africa of a baby factory. I mean, these are real cases where they've kidnapped women, as young as 13-year-olds and children, and they impregnate them, they rape them, and they make babies, and they take these babies and sell them for their organs, sell them for sex, sell them for satanic ritual abuse. Like, it does sound crazy. That's why I film it. We film our operations so that we can show the world this is very real. It's really happening.
Oh, and speaking of Jim, he's been all in on this QAnon stuff now for a couple of years at this point. Here we can see Jim speaking to a conservative conference crowd and talking about adrenochrome like everything he's saying is just a well-established and accepted scientific fact.
The adrenochroming of children, look, where we're at right now. Hopefully, we need your prayers.
You said adrenochrome.
Essentially, you have adrenaline in your body. I'll just simplify it. And when you are scared, you produce adrenaline. If a child knows he's going to die, his body will secrete this adrenaline.
Tim and Jim even united this year for a big, grand, QAnon-friendly marketing stunt for Sound of Freedom by interviewing none other than Donald Trump himself, which we saw a bit of earlier at the beginning of the video with Trump's obvious inability to recall even the slightest detail of Sound of Freedom, despite having literally seen it just minutes before the interview. See, Don, that's why I took a notebook. But you should know that not all of this interview was just pointless comedy like that. Some of it was dangerous and regressive rhetoric about abortion, border security, Donald Trump's indictments, and with a healthy dose of good old-fashioned brown-nosing thrown in there to boot.
Between the overturning of Roe versus Wade and the Hobbs decision, which wouldn't have happened without your appointments, and with the border enforcement, which is we know has rescued countless children. I mean, how does it feel to have gone in 4 short years really rescued what could be millions of children? How does that feel? And the other question, how does it feel to have been indicted unfairly twice, maybe a third time?
Could be fourth.
Probably for doing these things, right? I mean, I don't know why else they're doing it.
It is lame. Oh, is that your ass? Oh, closer to the hole, sir?
And it seems like all of the relentless pandering to the farthest fringes of conservative ideology has finally reached critical mass with an all-out online war of conspiracy taking place right now surrounding Sound of Freedom. It started soon after the release of the movie when many QAnon devotees took to TikTok and other social media to highlight what they saw as strange occurrences or problems taking place during Sound of Freedom screenings, specifically at AMC theater locations.
Don't know if any one of you have already been to see The Sound of Freedom, but my friends and I just walked out, and we are curious what your experiences were in the movie theater, because we pre-ordered our tickets, paid for them, they were claimed, got the link sent, and this is an AMC theater in Pineville, North Carolina. At some point today, the tickets got refunded to my friend and we couldn't figure out why. So we come anyways to the theater after dinner, and they're like, oh, well, we refunded all the tickets because there's no air conditioning in our theaters. Okay, whatever, we don't care. Are you still showing it? Yeah, you can still watch it. So we get to thinking, why did they not send out a notice in the email saying, hey, we refunded your tickets because there's no air conditioning? And we just are curious why didn't they let us know? There was no one in that theater. There was us 4 and 4 other people, 8 people in the theater on a Friday night. There was air conditioning in the lobby. There was air conditioning in the hallways. There was air conditioning in the bathrooms, not the theaters. I smell something stinky, and I think it's shit.
Yeah, sure, I'm sure there's no way to possibly explain why a movie theater's air conditioning system would be struggling a little bit in July. Complaints weren't limited to AC issues, though. Lights not going on when they were supposed to, or flickering, like you can see here. This one showed the movie basically just going full blue screen of death during the showing, and even audio captions being left on for films not advertised as having that feature.
In a bathroom, Tim regards himself in a mirror. He splashes water on his face. In daylight, Tim enters the sunny foyer of a home. A young girl throws her arms around him. A blonde woman approaches.
Now, ignoring that a lot of this is likely fake, most of the rest of it could be explained with just confirmation bias. Movie theaters have problems like this all the time, but most of the time people aren't looking out for them specifically so they can tie them to a larger conspiracy theory and then make videos about them to post online. But in a weird twist of fate, a second group of paranoid netizens would enter the fray on this issue, specifically the AMC stock bros who had all moved on to investing in the theater chain once I assumed GameStop wasn't fun anymore. Naturally, as you might expect, some of the QAnoners were trying to boycott AMC theaters based on this information, which the stock bros didn't see as the strange byproduct of a weird situation that it probably is, but rather as a full-on attack against their stock. This from Miles Klee at Rolling Stone. Along with these complaints came calls to boycott AMC or give it the quote-unquote Bud Light treatment, as when conservatives declared war on the beer brand over their endorsement deal with trans entertainer Dylan Mulvaney. The AMC apes, an investor class as rabidly online as the conspiracist right, took note of these rumblings and began spinning up their own outlandish counter-theories. In the TikTok complaints, they saw a coordinated attempt to drive down AMC stock and hurt their investment. One self-styled market analyst, for example, suggested that TikTok users could have been manipulated into making such content, or else were clout-chasing opportunists taking assignments from other parties. Some accused media outlets that aggregated the videos of trying to spread fake FUD, a marketing acronym for fear, uncertainty, and doubt, and helping short sellers to instigate a boycott. It got bad enough that both AMC CEO Adam Aron and Jeff Harman themselves had to issue separate statements that the rumors were completely false and that AMC's working relationship with Angel Studios was as strong as it could be. So let's recap for a second. Part 1 of Sound of Freedom's marketing strategy involved leaning into QAnon's terror reality so hard that they accidentally ended up creating their own conspiracy theories out of it. Plus, it's kind of obvious that the massive increase in both Tim and OUR's public profile, combined with the scandals we talked about earlier, would likely lead to some increased public scrutiny. While in an unscrupulous vacuum, it might make sense to align yourself with such a devoted and donation-friendly core audience, that kind of strategy will also inevitably lead to trouble, at least I think we can all agree. So how might one handle all of the inevitable criticism that's likely to come with that kind of behavior and baggage? Well, according to the Sound of Freedom and what I see to be part 2 of their marketing plan, that's simple. Deflect any and all criticism back onto the critics themselves, either as petty, anti-child liberal haters, or pro-trafficking monsters looking to protect the elites from consequences.
For some reason, some people walked away from the movie and they were like, oh, Tim Ballard is basically saying that only children are trafficked, nobody else. I mean, there was this whole narrative created around the plot of the film. How do you respond to that? Because it seemed like it was just one story that was being told.
So bizarre, so bizarre, so bizarre. Human trafficking, child trafficking, it is so unique in every place. I say, no, trafficking has different faces in different places. Yeah, nothing that you see in a Columbia-based story probably looks like what you're going to find in the United States. So let's just throw the whole thing out because it doesn't fit the narrative that I want, broadcast about how trafficking happens. It is so selfish. It's so selfish, not to me, not to the producers, that's who they target, to those kids who were rescued.
We broke through to some more mainstream press, and we've had some attack articles. This is a good sign that we're making progress, and there's attack articles coming in, and we've got reviews coming in that are all using the same language.
That's how you know.
Yeah, they're all using the exact same language to attack.
Copy paste and labeling. That's, I'm a victim of label. Like, that's the worst thing you can do, is to label.
But we should consider this a victory, Alejandro. This means that at least they broke their silence. It means they can't ignore this issue.
That's
right.
They
cannot ignore it.
They're scared, quaking in their boots, and it's because the public are listening to their hearts, which is what this film tells you to do.
But in my opinion, these kinds of cultural marketing tactics have only been smokescreens for the real strategy behind the massive blockbuster success of Sound of Freedom. The Harmans' radical and confusing implementation of the pay-it-forward system into the theater environment. See, as part of the marketing for the film, Angel Studios has allowed folks to purchase tickets on behalf of others so that they can see the movie if they want to, but can't afford it, since the movie is being marketed as such an important cultural statement and all that. If you were so inclined, you could go onto their website right now and prepay for as many tickets as you want. And then Angel would distribute those tickets to anyone that wanted them on your behalf. And while I'm sure that to a lot of folks this feels like a donation to an anti-human trafficking cause, in reality they're just dropping money straight into the pocket of an operation that is distinctly for profit. So in addition to literally developing a for-profit donation scheme to benefit themselves and their startup, the Harmans also found a way to completely throw off all the math by which movie theaters and studios can gauge whether or not a film has been successful. Because see, the thing is, with a normal movie like, say, a Barbie or an Oppenheimer, one movie ticket sold will generally translate to one butt in a movie theater chair, with that butt being connected to one set of eyes that will watch the movie. Unless, of course, like an illness or an emergency or something like that, but those are the kinds of statistical variables that you really just can't plan for. But even with that, and with all the fluctuations between cities regarding movie theater ticket prices, one thing should stay consistent. One movie ticket sold should generally mean that one individual actually watched the movie. But with the pay-it-forward system, anyone can basically buy as many preemptive tickets to this movie as they want, with the intention that folks who want to but can't otherwise see this movie will claim them, though there's really no system, it seems like, to verify whether these tickets are even claimed at all. And it's there where things start to get a lot murkier, because with Angel Studio's system, we should still have accurate reports of both the number of tickets sold and the gross revenue made by Sound of Freedom. But now we have no real way to estimate just how many of these purchased tickets actually led to someone watching the movie. And then, to tie all of this to a film like Sound of Freedom, which so aggressively ties itself into a humanitarian cause that many people support, well, that's when things start to go haywire real quick. For reference, on August 1st of this year, Angel's Sound of Freedom ticket website reported almost 14 million tickets sold, and yet also reported just 242,284 contributors who had purchased donated tickets. Now, of course, this math may be missing some factors, and Angel Studios hasn't helped by being exceptionally tight-lipped about the exact breakdown of the purchase numbers and how all of that breaks down on their end. But at the end of the day, by the numbers that Angel has given us to work with, we can expect that each individual contributor to Sound of Freedom paid for an average of around 60 tickets per contributor, throwing the whole butts in seats ratio completely on its ear, or butt, as the case may be. And I believe it's this which led Angel to actually remove the contributor stat line from the website if you go there now, as you can see in this screen cap taken on August 14th. What we do know, though, is that by all accounts, Sound of Freedom has been a total and complete box office smash success. To date, its $172 million box office sales have it sitting as the 10th most successful theatrical release for all of 2023. It's beaten out some huge names to get there, too. Established box office draws like Indiana Jones, Transformers, and Fast X, with some analysts even calling the numbers big enough to declare Angel Studios a mini-major studio just from the success of this one release. But the thing is, none of these movies or studios had the assistance of these helpful zealots buying up large numbers of tickets and inflating the overall sales figures. Whereas Sound of Freedom had the owner of In-N-Out Burger financing 6 completely free screenings at theaters, AMC theaters specifically, all across the country. And this is a great example of how the equity crowdfunding system gets really weird when you start tracking things like individual movie ticket purchases instead of just raw dollar amounts. And since Angel Studios is already being really shifty on things like tickets, revenue, and viewership numbers, I don't think it's unreasonable to assume that all of the free in-and-out tickets purchased for these showings were probably bought at retail price, and that they probably bought out whole theaters when they were doing it. After all, wouldn't a staunch supporter of the cause like this want to make this movie look as good as possible? And yet, just like for the donated tickets on the website, we have no data to tell us how many people actually took the offer to see this movie for free at these screenings. This all matters because it feels like Angel might have found a viable system to really manipulate the numbers on future theatrical releases. It's well known that faith-based media, or in this case, faith-adjacent media like Sound of Freedom, is dramatically more popular with its audiences than it is with critics, because while critics will generally be concerned with whether a film is well-made, interesting, and entertaining, faith-based audiences just don't work that way. They want to see their views reflected back at them from the screen. And as long as the message of a piece of media conforms to their worldview, everything else is secondary and can be forgiven. This is why these types of movies tend to not be popular with critics or larger audiences. The plot and production are traditionally sacrificed in the name of the faith, which, generally speaking, does not a good movie make. And this is the ceiling that faith-driven media like Sound of Freedom has never really been able to break through. Mainstream audiences, and honestly just even less engaged Christians, aren't really interested in sacrificing quality for faith, and also may often enjoy the risks that secular media takes, which Christian media really doesn't have access to. But then, what if someone introduces a system that allows you to buy tickets in anticipation of someone else watching the movie? Either to be reaffirmed in their own faith or possibly even converted to the ticket donator's worldview. Well, in my opinion at least, at that point you've got a really exploitable system on your hands. Here's the thing, I sincerely enjoyed the Barbie movie, one of my favorite movies I've seen in quite a while. I would encourage every last one of you watching this to go out and see the Barbie movie. I will not be paying for you to do that, let alone 59 of your closest friends, but if Barbie was my Lord and Savior and my salvation was tied up in getting people to go see that movie, well, maybe then I'd feel a lot differently about it. Now, to be as fair as I can be, a lot of this criticism I'm leveling really does hinge on whether or not Sound of Freedom is a good or even just worthwhile movie to see all on its own. I mean, everyone involved in the project says it's a fantastic film with an important message and that the only people who are haters of it are ones who haven't seen it yet, right? They're even waving free tickets in all of our faces trying to get folks to see this thing. And while I have serious concerns about those tickets and the system through which they were purchased, I can't deny that it does a really good job of helping all those folks get their point across. So, with all of that in mind, I decided to take Angel Studios up on their offer for a free, or rather donated, ticket and go see this thing at my local theater on August 6th of this year. Jen was having a girls' day, probably a much better time than I was having at that point, and since y'all are unbelievable and let me do this for a job, it kind of felt like I could get a little work done by going to see this thing and figure out what it's all about. My thought was, if the movie speaks to me and it's actually good, then maybe all my concerns are for nothing. So, how did I do it? And does Sound of Freedom hold up on its own as a movie and not just as a cultural lightning rod? Well, let's find out. Well, first, let's talk about the actual ticketing process itself, because it was actually quite interesting to use all on its own. I went through the link we saw earlier to request a ticket, which only required a little bit of personal information, which was a nice surprise, before being asked to check 2 boxes. One standard terms and conditions agreement, and one making me literally promise to see the movie. I decided for once in my life to read the terms and conditions because this whole thing was strange enough I was kind of expecting to find something weird in there. Sadly, that wasn't the case, although I will note that point 3 really seems to try and get across the point that these tickets are not guaranteed, they are in demand, they may not be available, and they are a gift from the studio and the donator to you that they do not have to let you have. Anyway, immediately after that, I got 2 emails back. One telling me that I was in the queue for a ticket at number 2, and another telling me I had a ticket waiting for me. If only the lines at Disney moved that quick, I don't think they'd have to be suing everybody. I have to say, though, this whole getting into the queue at number 2 and then immediately getting a ticket thing does call the whole these things are actually super exclusive and may not be available vibe into question. After all the hullabaloo, I ended up with, pleasantly enough, a simple Fandango code that fully covered the cost of the ticket, including the tax, and got me to the theater without any issues. I've got to admit, the Harman system at least works the way it says it does and shows that they're putting their money where their content is. Now, my local theater is not an AMC branded one, but all the same, nothing conspiracy worthy really took place as far as I could tell. All the lights went out when they were supposed to, the sound was fine, and the air conditioning was working pretty well. They were out of ice at the concession stand, so I had to sip on room temperature lemonade, but if that's all the global elites have to stop me, then they're gonna have to try harder. Although now that I think about it, I do admittedly kind of wonder if the hairy single dude sitting off to the side in a SpongeBob button-up furiously taking notes wasn't the conspiracy for my particular showing. Turns out it was me. I was the conspiracy the whole time, Austin. Now, I will say that my showing was in a small theater in the back of the building, but that's likely more based on turnout expectations than anything else, considering I went to see the movie in its fourth week. Still, I counted, and the total turnout was 15 people, including me. Not half bad for a Sunday matinee a month after debut. So as you can see here, I just went ahead and settled in with my soft pretzel, my tepid lemonade, and my handy-dandy little notebook. All that was left at this point was to actually see Sound of Freedom. So, did the movie live up to the hype? Did it effectively translate the complex and gut-wrenching problem of human trafficking into a popular summer thriller? And should all of you be hopping onto Angel Studios' website right now to claim your own free tickets? The short answer to those questions is no, and absolutely not. Sound of Freedom is not a good movie, and I would not recommend it to anyone for several reasons. For one, what is actually a pretty talented cast all gets completely wasted on what essentially boils down to Tim Ballard does all of the important stuff for 2 hours. Tim Ballard is truly the only Tim-portant character in this entire movie, no matter how much the people involved with its production want to say otherwise. For example, Tim's wife, played by literal Academy Award winner Mira Sorvino, gets about 3 total lines of dialogue in the entire thing. The only notable thing she does in the entire movie is encourage Tim to quit his job and save the children. And even then, she doesn't get to say the line about jeopardizing his salvation. They sanitized it. Like, what's the point? It would have been so much better if she'd told him, your salvation is on the line, mister. But no, they just went with this.
So you quit your job and you go and rescue those kids.
The movie also stars Bill Camp, a well-respected actor of both stage and screen with a long career, playing who is probably the only other character of any relevance in this entire movie, the gangster-turned-child savior, Vampiro. I mean what I'm about to say with full sincerity. I think Bill Camp was the only person in this movie who tried. He was the only person who tried to act, not counting the kids, but they're kids, like, you know what I mean. And he's honestly probably the only worthwhile thing about seeing this movie is his performance. He does a pretty good job. His character is a sort of creepy but also sort of endearing financier and strategist who works with Tim on his sting operations. His gravelly voice and ever-present cigar make for some of the only interesting or relatable characterization for any character in the entire movie.
When God tells you what to do, you cannot hesitate.
There's also Jose Zuniga, who may or may not be a good actor, but I certainly wouldn't know even after watching the movie because he's given almost no screen time or development, and instead just relies on Tim Jim to do all the work rescuing his kids for him. He's plastered on all the posters and the trailers, though, which I suspect has to do with the fact that the hugging pose looks really good to the people they're trying to market this to, and also the fact that he looks like an Equate brand Javier Bardem. But most tragically of all, in my opinion, the 2 children whose rescue and return the entire movie is centered around are also tragically unimportant and undeveloped. Kids are little people with thoughts, feelings, and powerful emotions of their own. And when a movie is about children going through such a horrible trauma as this, it would seem important, at least to me, to really try and have those kids' humanity shine through onto the screen. But instead, these kids were just straight up props, MacGuffins that Tim Jim could spend the entire runtime chasing down to move the plot along. The older girl, Rocio, she likes to sing. The younger boy, Miguel, he's small and timid. And that is all I know about either of them after seeing the entire movie. But, I mean, I guess I did have to mention them at least, so that's something, because at this point, we've run out of characters even worth talking about. That's it. That core group is 95 or more % of your movie. Every other bit of screen time, it seems like, is chewed up by Tim Jim doing his best stoic tough guy impression. From just the perspective of a regular moviegoer, it's an oddly paced thriller that's way too long, clocking in at 2 hours and 15 minutes. But with the benefit of a social issue it can lean on anytime there's a plot or production deficiency it needs to cover up. Like, the action and suspense in this thing are surprisingly minimal, but by God, you are going to get a lot of long-winded theatrical monologues about the bleak world of human trafficking. This comparison has been made a lot in media, but it's really spot on. This movie is just Taken if you were to replace Liam Neeson with Jim Caviezel and all of the competent crew with non-union randos and egotistical religious zealots. In my opinion, it was also pretty obvious this movie was written with an older audience in mind. Tim Jim's opening scene in the movie is the best example I can think of. In the scene, Tim and his ICAC counterparts are monitoring a perpetrator's download of CSAM materials from the dark web. And they're doing it from the old tried and true action movie mainstay, the surveillance truck down the road. I kid you not, these people's idea of the dark web is literally just a scarier looking browser on the desktop. And right in the middle of the scene, Tim Jim hits us all with a classic, if he cuts his connection now, we're gonna lose all of our evidence and then it's over type of, that bit, which is just a setup for a SWAT raid on the house that, I'm not kidding you, takes about 15 total seconds. And that is the kind of hackneyed storytelling you can expect for the next 2 hours and 10 minutes or so. Sound of Freedom, in my opinion, also makes a nasty habit out of approaching the abuse of human trafficking survivors in a way that, again, in my opinion, just kind of feels motivated for shock value more than it feels motivated to try and give an accurate portrayal of the horror and trauma associated with human trafficking. They often employ in this movie the trope of just getting right up to the line of being inappropriate with how they're showing or talking about abuse, but never in a way that actually feels like it lends something to the story or tells us things we don't already know. Now, I'm not going to say that atrocities and showing really dark, tough subject material isn't something that you need to do in some situations like this, but I'm also not going to pretend that the way Sound of Freedom approached this material felt anything other than exploitative and sensationalized once the movie was over. And perhaps most egregiously, this movie goes far out of its way to avoid discussing anything related to human trafficking that doesn't fit its predetermined QAnon-friendly narrative. Teenagers are barely referenced at all, despite teen girls being far and away the demographic most susceptible to trafficking for sexual purposes. Even Taken got that part right, dude. The movie only acknowledges trafficking in the context of children being kidnapped by complete strangers from large international trafficking syndicates, completely ignoring the fact that by all of the data we have, most children are trafficked by people that they know and trust. In my opinion, this is just a critical mistake, since it's that trust traffickers build up with kids that is often also used to manipulate them. And in a way that presents OUR in a particularly bad light, given what we've already talked about, this movie is absolutely and completely disinterested in discussing the aftercare that survivors of trafficking need once they are rescued. And instead, it very literally implies that returning these kids to their families will fix all of that trauma on its own. For context, Rocio is only returned to her father's custody in about the last 5 minutes of the movie. And then almost immediately starts returning to normal childlike behavior once that happens. Given that in the film itself it was said that these children were trafficked and abused for months on end, this is just a gross misrepresentation of the healing process and the trauma and the lasting difficulties that survivors of these kinds of horrible crimes will face. Media like this is harmful as hell to survivors of human trafficking. For one, it distorts the public image of the trafficking crisis, making it a problem of commandos and bad guys and sting operations, instead of the complex, difficult, and lifelong struggle that it usually ends up being. You remember that quote I used earlier from Ann Gallagher about Tim's unethical operations? Well, I think it might be a good time to take a look at that full quote in context. The exploitation of human beings for private profit is an outrage, whether it takes place in the United States or in a poor country far away. The temptation to do something in the face of such villainy can be overwhelming, and the lure of the quick fix is often very difficult to resist. But the task of eliminating human trafficking is not amendable to such an approach. It requires hard work, a tolerance for incremental, sometimes almost imperceptible success, and an unwavering commitment to justice and the rule of law. Ballard's operations say much about the man. They are arrogant, unethical, and illegal. Likewise, this kind of media can even remove real survivors themselves from this issue. Folks who were trafficked as teens, folks who had drug problems when they were trafficked, folks who were trafficked by people that they knew and trusted. These stories just do not fit the Sound of Freedom narrative very well. And over time, as more and more of these kinds of presentations are made, survivors may even start to question whether or not they themselves were trafficked at all. This kind of presentation can end up even drawing vital resources away from established, respected anti-trafficking organizations that are doing real, evidence-based work to combat the problem. People, especially folks like QAnoners who want a simple worldview of good guys versus bad guys, really want to give their money to the commandos saving the kids. And so they stop giving to therapists and caseworkers and teens who've survived trafficking. And then those activists and survivors are left behind by their own cause, as it's ripped out from under them to line the pockets of people like Tim and organizations like OUR. So at this point, you may be asking yourself, what does Sound of Freedom do well? And in my opinion, it does one thing very well: make Tim Ballard look like a child-saving tough guy. This movie, at least to me, came across as little more than an egregious fluff piece for Tim Ballard, a vehicle for Jim Caviezel, and maybe a distant third it was a movie about human trafficking. It's effectively a one-man show where everyone else is just supporting cast up to and including the representations of the human trafficking survivors he was supposedly trying to put front and center. It is literally at times comical how hard this movie goes trying to push Tim Ballard as a monolithic hero. In the only, and I mean only, scene of actual characterization for either of the two children, Rocio, shortly before the two are split up to be sold, gives Miguel a pendant that she wears for protection and poignantly tells him that he has to bring it back to her, which is actually a pretty effective scene. It kind of got me in the gut until I saw what was printed on that medallion. Specifically, the Catholic saint emblazoned on it, Timoteo, or Saint Timothy.
Tiene tu nombre, Nelly. Mi hermana me la dio. Tú rescatas niños, ¿verdad?
The movie literally makes sure to give the children an amulet that encourages them to trust Tim later on in the movie, in part because I think some folks might have been asking why these children trusted him so quickly. And they choose to do this by literally trying to portray Tim Ballard as a saint. Oh, and by the way, in case you were curious, Saint Timothy is apparently the patron saint of, wait for it, stomach disorders. Dead serious, I couldn't find anything he was related to except stomach disorders. No ties to children, rescue, safety, protection, slavery, anything like that. Just stomach pain. But I just can't stress this enough. Every single person, plot point, and action taken in this movie was designed to make Tim Ballard look good. To make him look as badass and righteous as possible. It's so egregious that it really does, at the end of this, just kind of feel like the entire issue of human trafficking was used to put him over as a hero. I mean, when they even managed to sneak his catchphrase into the movie, you know this movie was about lionizing Tim and nothing else.
God's children are not for sale.
Now, I do want to be careful and not take away any of the good that Tim and OUR have done. I expect that they have gotten several children, maybe even some teens and adults too, out of some horrific trafficking situations. I believe that everyone involved cares about children. But this film, to me, shows just how far Tim and OUR in particular have strayed from their original mission. If he really were the humble servant saving God's children from slavery, then Tim should be embarrassed at how comically overblown this movie is and how much it celebrates him like a golden calf. He would have, in my opinion, demanded rewrites to recenter the story around the grieving father and the children who were being exploited and not on himself and his own exploits. Or at least he could have had the decency to not shove more Trump propaganda in the movie by showing a literal scene where the border wall helps him stop a trafficking in process. It just feels like Tim only wants to be seen as a hero, and actually being a hero is secondary, and that he's very interested now in preserving all the fame and fortune that has come to him through this role. But ironically, it seems like the more famous he gets from anti-human trafficking work, the less suited he is to actually perform it. I mean, think about it. The clandestine nature of anti-human trafficking work, it's inevitably going to make this kind of self-promotion dubious from the start. When your work requires life and death undercover secrecy, wouldn't it make more sense to just stay in the shadows and bask in the private glory of the righteousness of your cause? Can Tim Ballard even go undercover or communicate with traffickers anymore the way that he used to? And does he even care? Oh, and also, plot twist, Tim doesn't even work for OUR anymore, and hasn't for at least a couple of months at this, and it seems to be at least in part due to OUR's own HR investigations into his behavior. Let's hear from Anna Merlin and Tim Marchman from Vice, whose work actually broke this story and forced Tim and OUR to admit the truth. An anonymous letter sent to employees of and donors to the anti-trafficking group Operation Underground Railroad asserts that founder Tim Ballard left the organization recently after an internal investigation into claims made against him by multiple employees, something which OUR does not dispute. The letter was shared with Motherboard by a person active in Utah philanthropic circles, who said that it is a topic of conversation among OUR donors. A separate source, who did not mention the letter, reached out to Motherboard last week to report that employees at OUR recently learned about an internal investigation at OUR into the allegations against Ballard. The letter claims that OUR employees who accompanied Ballard on an undercover operation abroad filed a complaint against him with OUR's Human Resources Department after the trip, and that a follow-up investigation culminated in his resignation. As Vice News has reported, a previous letter accused Ballard and organization's leadership of misusing donor funds and of unspecified misconduct towards women. At the time, OUR confirmed such a letter existed and was circulating, and told us the OUR Board of Directors received the letter 12 months ago, and after a thorough investigation found zero evidence to corroborate the allegations contained in the letter. The letter circulating now alleges that the Board of Directors and attorneys for the organization quote-unquote made agreements preventing OUR executives from discussing the results of the investigation. The letter concludes by asking the people who received it to keep the information in it confidential, and expressed concerns about how Ballard would conduct himself at new organizations. And for reference, to be fair, Tim has now recently started acknowledging himself in interviews as the head of Spear Fund, which is basically just an OUR clone with a different decal slapped over the logo. But the lesson I'm going to take from this is that if your anti-human trafficking movie is so wrapped up in the personality and persona of just one guy that you can't even have him stop promoting the movie as more and more allegations of misconduct come to light, well, then your movie's probably about that guy and not about human trafficking now, isn't it? There are a ton of great organizations out there doing incredible anti-human trafficking work. OUR and Spear Fund likely are not among those organizations. And honestly, any organization that works with Tim Ballard at this point, I would call into question. This movie firmly told me what I already suspected. Tim, somewhere along the way, lost sight of his anti-human trafficking goals, and instead has now become addicted to chasing the celebrity status he gained through such work. I don't know if he was always this way, but by all accounts I've seen, it's certainly how he is now. And while Tim and OUR certainly have cracked the code on how to market the human trafficking issue, one now has to wonder how connected they ever were to the issue at all. As I've already said, I expect this thing to be in bargain bins once all this is over. It's not entertaining, it's not informative, it's not even heartwarming. It's not really even notable for anything that I can think of, and I absolutely have no idea why on earth I would ever watch it again. If you want a good movie, watch something else. If you want to learn more about human trafficking, Google articles and resources from reputable sources and try to make sure that you have at least some survivors in there talking about the issue too. And if you want to feel good about the fate of humanity, well, do literally anything but watch this movie. But by all means, do not watch Sound of Freedom. But with all that in mind, let's close this story out with what I think has been the real story here this entire time. The rise of Angel Studios and the foothold they seem to be carving into American mainstream media. Now, I know darn well that I am a mega dweeb when it comes to all of this. Hell, I wrote an entire ad making fun of that. But what's happening at Angel Studios is nothing short of fascinating, any way you slice it, I think. From everything I can tell, this team of marketing geniuses, they may have found a truly unique way to try and advance conservative and Christian media further into the forefront of American culture than either of those things have ever been before. Pay It Forward system in particular just feels like a perfectly tailor-made system for catapulting Angel Studios' brand directly into the mainstream on short notice. It takes advantage of the Christian proclivity to put time, money, and resources into faith-based and faith-affirming projects. It reinforces the libertarian idea of the free market in a way that most conservatives just cannot get enough of. And it allows both of these groups to feel like they're cleverly circumventing all of those Hollywood fat cats that don't want to make the kind of content that they want to see. Pay It Forward allowed Angel Studios to capture the momentum of this dedicated viewer block in a way that immediately translated into big financial returns. And once they had that, they were equally as efficient at parlaying the crowdfunding success. And once they had that, they were equally efficient in parlaying that crowdfunding success into even more money by appealing it to venture capital firms. And then they innovated once again by taking that exact same approach straight into the movie theater. Now, this was a risk from everything I can see. The Angel Studios team had to be really diligent and work hard to find the right movie to put on this system for a theatrical release, where the smaller scale of their streaming TV shows and specials and movies allowed them to rely on those small, dedicated blocks of funders. Theatrical motion pictures require simply too many resources for small groups like that to keep up with. And just a good movie alone wasn't going to cut it. I mean, after all, good movies fail at the box office all the time, right? Instead, they knew that they needed a movie that people would support whether or not it was good or bad. They needed something that people would support on principle. They needed a movie that could fire up the conservative early fan base they had already built up in order to generate quick cash and returns, while also potentially being able to draw equally zealous new fans to the Angel Studios brand, which would allow them to keep that momentum up through the movie's entire theatrical run. Enter Sound of Freedom. I think the Harmans saw right away that this movie was their ticket to the big time. Its message of human trafficking prevention had a much broader and decidedly more secular appeal than something like His Only Son. Not to mention the fact that action thrillers just tend to do better at the box office than dry period pieces. I also think that the Harmans realized that for the small but rabid group of folks who subscribe to this QAnon human trafficking worldview, this movie would become a flashpoint around which they could all rally. Hell, for those kinds of folks, seeing this movie alone might feel as good as making a donation to a real anti-human trafficking charity. And then the Harmans just started letting them donate straight to the movie itself by purchasing tickets for others to see it as a statement of solidarity with the cause. It's really awful when you think about it, since those donations are just going to a theatrical movie and the studio that put it out. I mean, consider even the ticket I myself claimed. The person who bought that ticket probably won't ever know that it got used. I don't know who paid for the ticket for me. They didn't give me that name like they do on the streaming service. And likewise, I may have even gone to see the movie just for the purpose of making this video. But the Harmans don't care. I saw it. That's all they care about. The Harmans are the only people winning here, and they're winning in both directions. I mean, for God's sake, the after-credits scene on this thing was an absolutely shameless ad, encouraging you to pay it forward for someone else's ticket right there in the theater. If that doesn't tell us what's going on, I don't know what does.
We believe this movie has the power to be a huge step forward toward ending child trafficking, but it will only have that effect if millions of people see it. Now, I know it's weird, because we're in a theater, but feel free to pull out your phones and scan this QR code. We don't want finances to be the reason someone doesn't see this movie, so Angel Studios boldly has set up a pay-it-forward program where you can pay for someone else's ticket who might not otherwise see it.
The Harmans present themselves as the righteous champions and clever entrepreneurs behind a brand new kind of Christian streaming service that, according to them at least, can only enhance the world of entertainment at large. In reality, though, I think that the fact that they were so comfortable to push this movie all the way to theaters, to lean in on the QAnon angle for marketing, and to accept donated tickets to their own movie like that, it tells a different story and paints the Harmans in a much worse light than they probably want. And will pay it forward as a system ever actually mean anything? Well, I think time is the only thing that can tell us how sustainable of a business model it's going to be. But in the meantime, we do know that all of the Harmans are pros at both fundraising and advertising. They have shown time and time again an ability to recognize and pivot with changes in trends and culture. And that was all before they had a $170+ million box office smash under their belts. And from everything I could see, they're getting ready to evolve the Angel Studios model again. See, ironically, the most interesting thing for me about the theatrical experience of Sound of Freedom was actually the trailers that came before it. And that's not just because it was super boring. Angel Studios has well used this theatrical opportunity to put out a bunch of new trailers for their upcoming slate of projects, and from what I can see, they look to be aiming for a much wider array of content than they had originally planned. Some of the films I saw advertised include Cabrini, a stoic period piece set in the early part of the 20th century that covers the life and times of Italian-American immigrant and devout Catholic nun Francis Xavier Cabrini, and it's directed by none other than Alejandro Monaverde, director of Sound of Freedom. They also showed The Shift, an action science fiction popcorn flick that is apparently based on the biblical story of Job and is definitely being directed by Dallas Jenkins of The Chosen. And they also showed Journey to Bethlehem, a musical based on Mary and Joseph, and the directorial debut of Adam Anders, a prolific music and media producer with ties to both Glee and Hannah Montana. Angel Studios also seems to be working hard to bring in more established actors into the fold for their upcoming slate of projects. Neil McDonough, for example, a devout Catholic himself, will star in both the aforementioned Shift and is also slated to star in Angel's upcoming 2024 post-apocalyptic series, Homestead. Actor Antonio Banderas, another Catholic, and Christian rapper Lecrae both appear to have supporting roles in Journey to Bethlehem, as will John Lithgow, who appears in Cabrini. And perhaps most shockingly, in my opinion, Angel appears to be moving forward with an improv show called Dry Bar Unscripted, starring noted trans rights activist and Whose Line legend, Colin Mochrie.
Hi, I'm Colin Mochrie, and I have been tasked to assemble the greatest crew of improv comedians the world has ever seen. So I cloned myself 4 times. Unfortunately, clones don't live very long. So I did the next best thing. I'm helping to create the largest platform for improv comedy, and I'm calling it Dry Bar Unscripted. It will be the sister channel to Dry Bar Comedy. Dry Bar Comedy generates over 1 billion views a year and profits millions.
Yeah, y'all, I'm as sad as you are about that one. And perhaps to cap all of this off, Angel has yet another huge crowdfunding success with David, a 3D animated film retelling the biblical story of David, slated for 2025, that has already overtaken The Chosen as the most successful crowdfunding of a piece of media in history, at over $50 million. This Mormon-led streaming service seems to be trying to unite all of Christian entertainment under their one singular banner. And honestly, I think they're doing a much better job of it than us secularists might want to admit. They've brought together the Mormons, the Catholics, the evangelicals, and now even a trans rights activist. And what's crazier is they've seemed to get all of those folks on the same page when it comes to making content for their brand. Who's to say they can't do the same with a bigger audience than what they've got now? Get them all on the same page and watching the same stuff, even as they disagree in principles and faith. I swear, I know it sounds like I'm kind of hyping these guys up, but It's more about I'm just in awe of what this might be. I personally certainly don't want this kind of conservative platform to gain a prominent foothold in American entertainment. And furthermore, I think the Harmans showed us how unscrupulous they were willing to be with this whole Sound of Freedom debacle. I just worry there may not be anything out there that can stop their ascent to the top. So, is there anything that might actually slow this juggernaut down? Well, yeah, I think there actually is. In fact, this strategy for content creation, it seems like could just as easily blow up in their faces as well as make them many more money millions. For example, The Chosen appears to be struggling to finalize the funding for their 4th season through the pay-it-forward system. Who can say yet if it's going to get all the way there, especially if the audience somehow loses interest in this story I'm sure a lot of them already know by heart. Oh, and by the way, they want to make 7 seasons of this thing. The pay-it-forward model also recently found itself with an uncomfortable black eye in the form of Fabian Marta. Marta, a Missouri native, was a loud and proud early investor for both Angel Studios and Sound of Freedom operating through the pay-it-forward system. That would have all been well and good, except for the fact that earlier this month, Fabian was arrested on charges of kidnapping a child. And so now, his name in the credits is just an awfully bad look for this very particular movie. Full disclosure, I didn't take this picture or look for his name in the credits, so they may have removed it by now, but the fact that it was ever there is just a really bad look and makes me wonder if a byproduct of Pay It Forward for Angel Studios might be getting locked into giving very public credit to very bad people. To be fair, I don't think this is likely a huge concern for them, but Fabian's arrest really made me wonder, and I felt like I'd be remiss if I didn't mention it. More broadly, though, I think that just relying on such a small and dedicated audience like this is going to invariably lead to a homogenous product that rarely takes risks or expands on itself. The reliability and consistency of faith-based audience engagement, well, that's historically had a pretty high floor, but also a pretty low ceiling. You'll end up with the same fans wanting the same thing over and over and over, with no room for the growth and product expansion that's generally required for larger mainstream success. Let's think about Cabrini and Alejandro Montverde for a second. Sure, he wrote and directed a big summer blockbuster that did very well with The Sound of Freedom. On paper, it makes sense for the Harmans to bring him back for another huge, definitive project for Angel Studios like this. But we also know that Sound of Freedom was not a good movie. Alejandro's movie was popular and profitable, but that was mostly due to a devoted core audience that didn't care if it was good or not. And now they're bringing him back to direct a slowly paced award show biopic that will likely rely on really good direction in order to get the most out of its actors? Well, color me skeptical. I think this, in fact, might be the fatal flaw of the entire Angel Studios system. Secular studios do have a high failure rate, but a lot of times that's because they're willing to take risks, try new things, try new people. Yeah, a lot of these won't work out, sure, but some of them will. I mean, just ask Warner Brothers if taking the plunge on Greta Gerwig for Barbie is paying off for them. I wonder if they'll just atrophy under the weight of low-quality productions. I know, I just made it sound like they've got this great new slate of projects coming out, and they might, depends on how we'll see, but they also have some stuff that's just kind of weird and problematic coming up, too. For example, alongside all the other projects I've talked about, they also have announced Live Not by Lies, a documentary series based on the book of the same name by conservative religious columnist Rod Dreher. This seems to be a fringe product aiming to encourage Christian action in the face of a world overrun with the soft totalitarianism of communism. To me, this feels like an example of how Pay It Forward might backfire and blow up in Angel Studios' face, as they might be stuck moving forward with a project that has very little broad appeal and problematic implications to go along with it. If Angel's trying to bring in any kind of left-leaning or secular audience, this is going to do the exact opposite, I think. And what's more, I expect a show like this to be just loaded with uncomfortable sound bites that can be used against them and their brand. I mean, yeah, they can maybe go viral with some of it like they did with Dry Bar Comedy, but how long is that going to last? But I think it's more likely to push people away in the long run. Likewise, literally 2 days prior to the release of this very video, Angel is slated to announce Gabriel and the Guardians, their first ever anime project, which is reportedly based on the Old Testament in some capacity. I don't necessarily think this one's going to be as problematic as Live Not by Lies, although it could be. It certainly could be. But in the meantime, it's just kind of a hard concept to take seriously, right? It may be big, but the Christian anime, I'm not sure. That's a weird one. And then there's Tuttle Twins, the libertarian-friendly kids show working hard to sell Ronald Reagan and Bitcoin to every homeschooler in America. To me, this show is the single most odd, uncomfortable, and at times fully unethical piece of children's media I've ever seen, and the fact that it was ever greenlit truly makes me question the judgment of everyone at Angel Studios. But spoiler alert, I'm making a separate video for September covering that whole ball of wax all on its own. I really hope all of you join me for the Tuttle Twins video, and I can assure you that it will not be as heavy as what we've talked about here today. So in the meantime, I hope you all have enjoyed taking this deep dive with me into Sound of Freedom, Angel Studios, and the insane impact both of those things have had on American culture and media just this summer alone. And if nothing else, I hope I've encouraged you to keep an eye on them, the whole thing they're doing, and see how it plays out, because I don't want it to sneak up on you. Angel Studios is clever, and based on what I've seen, they could end up fully in the mainstream before any of us even realize it. So I just encourage you to see if you see their ads or see if you can tell they're being promoted. Just keep an eye on them. I think it's better if we heathens keep an eye on them before they can keep an eye on us, if you know what I mean. And in the meantime, that's all I've got for today. I'll see you next month when we take on the Tuttle Twins. Y'all take care. Whew! Another one in the books. I have no idea how long this is going to be. I've been recording for 4 hours now, and I just kicked my camera stand. I'm going to keep this real brief. Thank you all so much for everything. It's still blowing my mind every single day that I get to do this for a living, to make these kinds of videos and talk about stuff I think is so cool and interesting, and that you all join me for this. You all are the coolest people on the planet. The Genonites are our favorite people on Earth, and I cannot stress that enough. We got a lot of cool things coming up here at Fundy Friday. Some great new episodes slated for the next couple of months. We've got some new merch coming down the pipe real soon, so keep an eye out for that, because it's going to be cool. We're doing some different stuff than we've ever done before. And I also want to remind everyone that if you like what we do here at Fundy Fridays and you really want to support us, and I can't tell you how much it means, our Patreon is the absolute best way to do that. Our Patreon or YouTube channel membership. We just started working with that. You can do that too, but Patreon's the number one. That's the one that supports us most actively. That's our lifeblood. That's what keeps the channel afloat and makes sure that we can do this full time and that we can keep this free and available for everyone. Our patrons hold up this entire community. And if you like what we do, I cannot encourage you enough to become a part of that community. In the meantime, as always, I just want to thank you all so much. It's been a tough little bit recently. I've been dealing with depression. My brain has not been working with me. You all help put it back on straight every time. And I'm getting weepy. It's that depression again. I'm letting you know, but I love you all so much. I love how you take care of my wife and tell her how great she is. And I just thank you for everything. Y'all take care, do something kick-ass this weekend, and have a nice day.